Alright guys, it's Friday, April 9th, and last time we looked at chapter 3, but I only read some of the beginning, and I want to recap some of the later stuff, and then today we'll look at a bit of chapter 4. We'll do the same thing where I'll read the beginning aloud, and then I'll let you guys finish up. I think what I'll do is not post any assignment today, because I already have a few assignments in there of the first couple chapters, and then one other thing that I haven't graded yet, and some of you guys haven't finished yet, so I want to get caught up on that. Friday is usually a good time to do such a thing. Friday can be our sort of office hours, catch up, grade, review type day, and then next week I'll post an assignment. We'll read chapter 5 next week, and I'll post an assignment. We'll call it a study guide maybe, and it'll have questions over the whole thing, including chapter 4 and 5, so that we know that you're ready, you know what happened, and have a few ideas of what it means, because later next week we'll have a quiz. This will be a medium-sized grade, nothing huge, but it'll be your first assessment grade for the quarter, and we want to make sure we get those in there early and not just wait till the end. So chapter 3, we read a bit at the beginning, and honestly, this is like the longest one and the most important one in some ways, even though the stuff that happens is all flashback. It's all backstory. It's all what the old drunk man, Zadok Allen, is telling to our narrator, not any new information that's happening. I mean, it's new information he doesn't know, but it's not new stuff that's happening right now in the present day. So we've got our narrator wants to learn about this town, but he's also careful. If he just goes up to ask everybody, hey, why do you guys look weird? Why is everyone hoarding gold, but the houses are run down? Why is everyone telling me to stay away from this old man? What if they, throw him in a cell or eat him, or who knows what they could do? So our guy sees Zadok Allen along the way and comes up with a plan of like, okay, I'm going to buy a bottle of whiskey. He's going to see it. I'm going to walk over away from the public street, and maybe he'll follow me, and then I can get him to talk. And he does. And we read some of this last time. And unfortunately, this is a wonderful story, but the one annoying part is the way that this guy talks, how the author writes his accent in there instead of just writing normal words. It's like, them lar hills, and when he says the word first, he says fust, F-U-S-T, in order to represent this guy's accent. So it is a bit hard to read, and you heard me do it last time in this silly voice. I'm not going to read a whole bunch of that aloud, but if you want, you can find audiobooks and performances. There is one that I linked to when we started this story, and it is pretty good, even though it takes longer than just reading it. They slow it down and really get into the slow performance, but if you like that kind of thing, it's totally fine. So this guy says, okay, in the 1800s, which was only a couple decades ago, remember this is set in the 20s, they were on an expedition in what they call the South Sea, which means South Pacific. Okay, not south of where they are now, but south of Japan, basically. And they found some islands, very normal islands, and normal people, and the humans there were just, struggling to make it. And sometimes they would find fish, and sometimes they would have good trade and so on. But then they found one island that was different. And this one island was doing great. And the people there had as much fish as they could want, and they had gold. And they, if you got to know them a little and you got them talking, they started saying, hey, you know what, we live forever. When our people get old, they go off into this other area, and we can talk to our ancestors. And if you go to a new place and they say something like that, you might say, yeah, okay, buddy. We all have beliefs like that, right? Every culture says that, we live on and we can meet our ancestors. And maybe we can meet them in our heart or in a vision or something. But this island is like, no, they're right over there. I can talk to my 5 times great grandfather in the sea. We go in the sea when we get old. When we turn around 70, maybe we go into the water and live forever. One of the great things about sci-fi, fantasy, and horror is that when you're writing it, you could have a crazy, unique imagination, and you could come up with new, wild ideas. And of course, Lovecraft did that. But you could also just say, hey, what if all the stuff people talked about really happened? What if the cults and the religions were right? What if they said we can live forever and they actually did? Or what if they said we worship this sea spirit and they actually did meet that guy? You can kind of imagine something like that. So in this island, Obed Marsh, who we've heard about since the very beginning, chapter 1, we've never seen. And you might assume he would be dead, because this is a guy who was a little older than Zadok Allen, and so he would be, 100-something at this point. Normally he wouldn't be alive. And our narrator doesn't think he's alive. But when you start hearing about the fantasy elements and so on, you might think, what if he is at the center of the town like some vampire or something? So Obed Marsh met this group of people on this island and got them to talk about their ceremonies and talk about their practices. And it turns out they had met this race of creatures from the deep, kind of like fish, but obviously not fish. They were something else, and you might see the word God in here, but you might see the word devils in here. And the whole point of this type of story is that when something is strange enough, you don't really know what to call it. Just like my anecdote about the guys who found the radioactive core in that abandoned radiation machine in a hospital. It's hard to describe what they felt when they saw it. It was just this strange glowing thing. And maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, maybe it's something else. But when these people talk about the creatures, they might call them gods, they might call them devils, they might call them monsters, and none of those really fit, but they're just strange. Lovecraft might have posted stories, or I just use the word posted in a very modern way, but he might have published stories in this magazine called Weird Tales. Weird is a good word for it. They have made a deal with these creatures to get some fish, get some gold, and eventually, like I said, they can live forever. They can transition to a new form and go into the sea. But, of course, you have to supply something on your end of the deal as well. They're not just giving you all of these benefits for free. It turns out that they first have to send a few people down there as sacrifices. And then later they have to intermarry and sort of join the civilization of these sea creatures, and not always to their to their great joy. They didn't really like doing this, but they knew it was part of the deal. So a few paragraphs later, Zadok Allen says, one time we went back and that island was gone. All the neighboring groups of people who were just normal people had come in and wiped them out. And that means at this point, if you have a, English class mindset, you might think, hey, this is foreshadowing. This is a mirror of what's going to happen in Innsmouth, because everything is so, parallel to what we've seen. We see our guy getting the story out of Zadok Allen, just like Obed Marsh got the story out of the chief on this island. We see, hey, there's this weird place with people who have gold and they are associated with the sea, and the neighboring places don't like them, just like is happening now in Innsmouth. And we see that one day the neighboring humans came and wiped them out, just like happened in the very first paragraph. We know that the government is going to come in and wipe out this town and capture everybody and blow up the buildings. So it seems like, hey, whatever has happened before is going to happen again. This is a cyclical thing, and maybe people can learn from history, but maybe they won't, and it's going to turn out just like it did for those guys in the Pacific. So at the end of chapter 3, Zadok Allen is telling this story, and he says that one night Obed Marsh came back to Innsmouth and he did some ritual where they dropped some sacred items and said some chants and got these old god slash devil slash monsters slash the term they use later is the deep ones. They call them the deep ones. They got these guys to come out of the ocean and make a deal with this town of just like what was happening with the previous island. They're going to get some gold, they're going to get some fish, but they're going to have to pay up in terms of sacrifice and joining this culture. So then Zadok Allen gets spooked, kind of screams and runs away. When I was reading this for the first time, I was sure that he was just going to die. Like, I thought he was just going to have a heart attack or disappear or, get shot by one of the townsfolk or something. But in fact, he just runs away. It's almost like, in a cartoon when like Daffy Duck runs through the wall and you see a Daffy Duck shaped hole in the wall or something. I kind of imagine him running away in that crazed, cartoony way where you almost don't even notice until he's gone. So now let's read. I know I just spent 10 minutes recapping, but I think it's important because, like I said, that chapter has all the good stuff, all the foreshadowing and parallels and backstory. Almost you don't even need to read the rest because you know what's going to happen if you assume it's the same as what happened to the previous town. But of course, we're going to get to, the climax, the action, all the good stuff, all the stuff we've been waiting for, which is, if you imagine this like a haunted house story, all the other chapters have been walking up the steps, hearing the creaks, seeing the shadows against the moon, wondering if it's a ghost or just, Scooby-Doo villain in a mask. And now we're actually going to get to the ghost to chase the monster. So chapter 4. I can hardly describe the mood in which I was left by this harrowing episode. An episode at once mad and pitiful, grotesque and terrifying. The grocery boy had prepared me for it, yet reality left me nonetheless bewildered and disturbed. Puerile though the story was, or some people pronounce that word puerile. I've never really liked either one. It means childish and fantastical. Old Zadok's insane earnestness and horror had communicated to me a morning unrest which joined my earlier sense of loathing for the town and its blight of intangible shadow. Later I might sift the tale and extract some nucleus of historic allegory. Just now I wished to put it out of my head. The hour had grown perilously late. My watch said 7:15, and the Arkham bus left Town Square at 8. So I tried to give my thoughts as neutral and practical a cast as possible, meanwhile walking rapidly through the deserted streets of gaping roofs and leaning houses toward the hotel where I'd check my valise and would find my bus. If you remember, he said, I'm not staying overnight. Even though I'm curious, I'm not that crazy. He's mentioned a few times I'm going to catch the bus at 8 on the way out. Of course, when you hear something like that in a story, you might think, well, he's going to miss it, right? That's foreshadowing. It's just like when a character in a horror movie says, I'll be back. I'm going to go check what's happening upstairs. Or I'm going to go turn the power on or something. Of course, they're not going to come back. you're going to find their bloody handprints and see that Jason got them or something. Though the golden light of late afternoon gave the ancient roofs and decrepit chimneys an air of mystic loveliness and peace, I could not help glancing over my shoulder now and then. I would surely be very glad to get out of malodorous and fear-shadowed Innsmouth, and wish there were some other vehicle than the bus driven by that sinister-looking fellow sergeant. Yet I did not hurry too precipitately, for there were architectural details worth viewing at every silent corner, and I could easily, I calculated, cover the necessary distance in a half hour. Studying the grocery youth's map, and seeking a route I had not traversed before, I chose Marsh Street instead of State for my approach to Town Square. Near the corner of Fall Street I began to see scattered groups of furtive whisperers, and when I finally reached the square I saw that almost all the loiterers were congregated around the door of Gilman House. It seemed as if many bulging, watery, unwinking eyes looked oddly at me as I claimed my valise in the lobby, and I hoped that none of these unpleasant creatures would be my fellow passengers on the coach. The bus, rather early, rattled in with 3 passengers somewhat before 8, and an evil-looking fellow on the sidewalk muttered a few indistinguishable words to the driver. Sergeant threw out a mailbag and a roll of newspapers, and entered the hotel, while the passengers, the same men whom I had seen arriving in Newburyport that morning, shambled to the sidewalk and exchanged some faint guttural words with a loafer in a language I could have sworn was not English. I boarded the empty coach and took the same seat I had taken before, but was hardly settled before Sergeant reappeared and began mumbling in a throaty voice of peculiar repulsiveness. It appeared, in very bad luck. There had been something wrong with the engine, despite the excellent time made from Newburyport, and the bus could not complete the journey to Arkham. No, it could not possibly be repaired that night, nor was there any other way of getting transportation out of Innsmouth, either to Arkham or elsewhere. Sergeant was sorry, but I would have to stop over at the Gilman. Presumably the clerk would make the price easy for me, but there was nothing else to do. Almost dazed by this sudden obstacle, and violently dreading the fall of night in this decaying and half-unlighted town, I left the bus and re-entered the hotel lobby, where the sullen, queer-looking night clerk told me I could have room 428 on the next top floor. Large, but without running water, for $1. Okay, so our guy sees people muttering to each other, and then he gets on the bus, and the bus says, well, actually we can't go. The engine's bad. And you might think that's bad luck, or you might think maybe the people are muttering about our guy, and they're coming up with a plan, and they're telling him he's got to stay, and it's all a, conspiracy. One thing about stories like this, where you go to a strange town, is you might wonder about one bad thing, but you might also wonder about what if the whole town is against you. Stephen King's Salem's Lot is a good one, where the town has been slowly taken over by vampires, and so you look around and you think, oh, maybe they're all vampires, and they're wondering if they're gonna suck my blood next. Or when I was a kid, I read Animorphs. You guys ever read Animorphs? When I was a kid, there was this book series about aliens who would take over the town, and so when you look around, you think, oh, maybe all these people are aliens, and maybe I'm next. Despite what I had heard of this hotel in Newburyport, I signed the register, paid my $1, let the clerk take my valise, and followed that sour, solitary attendant up 3 creaking flights of stairs past dusty corridors which seemed wholly devoid of life. My room, a dismal rear one with 2 windows and bare, cheap furnishings, overlooked a dingy courtyard otherwise hemmed in by low, deserted brick blocks, and commanded a view of decrepit westward stretching roofs with a marshy countryside beyond. At the end of the corridor were the bathroom, a discouraging relic, with ancient marble bowl, tin tub, faint electric light, and musty woody paddling around all the plumbing fixtures. It being still daylight, I descended to the square and looked around for a dinner of some sort, noticing as I did so the strange glances I received from the unwholesome loafers. Since the grocery was closed, I was forced to patronize the restaurant I had shunned before. A stooped, narrow-headed man with staring, unwinking eyes, and a flat-nosed wench with unbelievably thick, clumsy hands being in attendance. The service was of the counter type, and it relieved me to find that much was evidently served from cans and packages. A bowl of vegetable soup with crackers was enough for me, and I soon headed for my cheerless room at the Gilman, getting an evening paper and a fly-speck magazine from the evil-visaged clerk at the rickety stand behind his desk. So we go to this restaurant. At the beginning of the story, he sees a restaurant. He's like, no thanks. But now it's the only thing open, so our guy's going to go there. And luckily, they're just getting their stuff out of a can, so you don't have to find something, prepared and harvested in this town, because who knows what kind of evil curse could be upon it. As twilight deepened, I turned on the one feeble electric bulb over the cheap iron frame bed and tried as best I could to continue the reading I had begun. I felt it advisable to keep my mind wholesomely occupied, for it would not do to brood over the abnormalities of this ancient, blight-shadowed town while I was still, within its borders. The insane yarn I had heard from the aged drunkard did not promise very pleasant dreams, and I felt I must keep the image of his wild, watery eyes as far as possible from my imagination. For me, this is a paragraph, and this happens every once in a while in the story, where I see a paragraph that's just like 100% Edgar Allan Poe. This is totally something that Poe would write. He has narrators that would, hear about something crazy and then think, well, I'm just going to sit in bed and try to hope it goes away. There's one called The Oval Painting, I think, or something like that, about a guy who reads this crazy backstory of this evil painting, and he's just like, yeah, well, that's pretty weird. And he's sitting in bed trying to rationalize and calm himself. I'm going to read a tiny bit more, but this video is getting long, so we'll cut it out and let you guys read the rest, or maybe I'll recap some in the next video like I did chapter 3 in this one. Also, I must not dwell on what the factory inspector had told the Newburyport ticket agent about the Gilman house and the voices of its nocturnal tenants. Not on that, nor on the face beneath the tiara in a black church doorway, the face for whose horror my conscious mind could not account. It would perhaps have been easier to keep my thoughts from disturbing topics had the room not been so gruesomely musty. As it was, the lethal mustiness blended hideously with the town's general fishy odor and persistently focused one's fancy on death and decay. Another thing that disturbed me was the absence of a bolt on the door of my room. One had been there, as marks clearly showed, but there were signs of recent removal. No doubt it had become out of order like so many other things in this decrepit edifice. In my nervousness, I looked around and discovered a bolt on the clothes press, which seemed to be the same size, judging from the marks, as the one formerly on the door. To gain a partial relief from the general tension, I busied myself by transferring this hardware to the vacant place with the aid of a handy 3-in-1 device, including a screwdriver, which I kept on my keyring. The bolt fitted perfectly, and I was somewhat relieved when I knew that I could shoot it firmly upon retiring. Not that I had any real apprehension of its need, but that any symbol of security was welcome in an environment of this kind. There were adequate bolts on the 2 lateral doors to connecting rooms, and these I proceeded to fasten. So our guy is thinking about, what have I heard from other sources? One thing that he's heard is that the empty houses are the ones to worry about. So if you see people and they've got their lights on and they're doing their job, well, maybe they're like slightly transformed into these fish creatures. They have big eyes or whatever. But the empty houses are the ones where, maybe they have humans who have been really far transformed over decades and they're in sort of, monstrous form. Or maybe they have creatures that have been brought up from the deep and now we're keeping them in our town. That's one thing the narrator's thinking about. Another thing is that there's not even a lock on the door. It's like, sometimes in a bathroom stall, you see like the little slider part is gone and you can't lock it. That's the idea, is they've got a bolt, meaning the little thing that slides into the notch to keep it closed, but the bolt is not there. So he's taken a little piece off of a laundry thing and shoved it in to make sure nobody gets in the door. I did not undress, but decided to read till I was sleepy and then lie down with only my coat, collar, and shoes off. Taking a pocket flashlight from my valise, I placed it in my trousers so that I could read my watch if I woke up later in the dark. Drowsiness, however, did not come, and when I stopped to analyze my thoughts, I found to my disquiet that I was really unconsciously listening for something which I dreaded but could not name. That inspector's story must have worked on my imagination more deeply than I had suspected. Again I tried to read, but found that I made no progress. After a time I seemed to hear the stairs and corridors creak at intervals as if with footsteps, and wondered if the other rooms were beginning to fill up. There were no voices, however, and it struck me that there was something subtly furtive about the creaking. I did not like it, and debated whether I had better try to sleep at all. This town had some queer people, and there had undoubtedly been several disappearances. Was this one of those inns where travelers were slain for their money? Surely I had no look of excessive prosperity. Or were the townsfolk really so resentful about curious visitors? Had my obvious sightseeing with its frequent map consultations aroused unfavorable notice? It occurred to me that I must be in a highly nervous state to let a few random creakings set me off speculating in this fashion. But I regretted nonetheless that I was unarmed. So our guy is sitting there hearing creaks, which every building has. You know, if you just wait until night, you hear creaks in the building because the temperature's changing, things expand and contract. And if you heard people around, then you go, oh, well, it's people walking. But this guy hears no people, and instead of making that better, he could be like, oh, well, there's nobody there. It must just be the wood, going through its natural changes over time. He says, oh, that makes it worse because I hear nobody. That means they must be secretly trying to kill me. They must be, expert assassins coming for the unsuspecting guest. And so our guy is in this mood where nothing would help. If he heard voices, that would be scary. If he hears no voices, that's even scarier because that means they're being sneaky around him, right? And I'm going to stop here because I don't want to make a dang half-hour video, but you guys can read the rest. We'll talk about it next time, and then next week we'll finish up the story, review, quiz, all that good stuff. Thanks.